We're here for a talk on TrendMiner OSIsoft integration. I assume that most of the people in the audience are either using the Pi system or other components in the OSI universe, or are seriously considering to do so. Well, there's no better context really to do this presentation than with Richard on my side. Richard is the CTO at OSIsoft, and I'm very thrilled that we have him here with us at our user event. So Richard will kick off to frame a little bit what the partnership is about and how OSI looks at partnerships. And he will also later on the talk introduce a new component in the OSIsoft universe called OSIsoft Cloud Services, and I'll then also explain what we did in terms of integrating with that. So Richard, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Thomas. It's really exciting to be here. Almost 30 years ago, I was a host of OSIsoft's very first users conference. So it was about this size. And I look forward to many, many great years of this event. What I've seen so far is wonderful. How many people here were in Gothenburg last week? Wow, okay, thank you. Thank you for coming up to Sweden. For those of you who don't know, we had our annual European-based users conference for OSIsoft. And TrendMiner was one of our sponsors and has been a very amazing partner with OSI. Let me just go through it real quick to lay the context for why the partnership with TrendMiner is so important. And I loved how the opening session started off with, what was it, Analytica and Scientifica. Because OSI started its life connecting across disparate systems, bridging across different landscapes. And I think that one of the themes that I've heard here, and one of the themes that I think will resonate for everybody, is whenever you can bridge across systems, across communities, across enterprises, across any barrier, you really the opportunities for the synergies and the new insights and the new value really accelerate. So this is a picture of how we think about the Pi system today. It started with a focus really down at the asset level and at the plant level. And when we first started, we were bridging across disparate systems, PLCs, DCSs. There weren't even LANs in local area networks. When I started, if I went into a plant, there wasn't wireless. There wasn't TCP/IP, wasn't a standard thing. Most of our customers used DECnet if they had any kind of network. So in those days, bridging systems was actually a real and legitimate challenge with different kinds of opportunities by bringing those systems together from the control network, from the lab, into one world. Then we scaled that up to the plant. Over the last many years, we've been focusing on how we bridge the enterprise. Pardon me. And throughout all of this, we are singularly focused on acquiring data from these systems to create these bridges, keeping that data and managing that data. For some of our customers, since the 80s, actually, they still have all that data available online. Putting it into context, and for us, that's typically a physical context. The context of the process, the context of the equipment, the context of the unit operations, or even in the enterprise. And then making that data available. For us, that is the world we focus on. So we do have some what I would call applications like PiVision, our Excel integration, and a few other applications. But we're not an application company. We're really focused on the acquisition of the data, the management of that critical operations data, the contextualization of that information, and making it available across the evolving landscape of technologies and platforms. And this is where partnerships for OSI are so critical, because for all of you, there is value in that data. There are things you can do with that data. But to really mine, and I mean this literally, mine the value out of that data, you need to apply domain-specific, worldview-specific application on top of that information. And this is where I think TrendMiner has really shined in this partnership. That is what I'll say on that for now, and turn it over to Thomas to do a tour of some of the integration that they've done.
Okay. So what I want to do next is I want to walk through the different integrations that we have with the OSIsoft tooling, explain you a little bit of how they work in case you're not too familiar with them. And then we'll come to some of the new things, because we'll start with some things that might be familiar to some of you that already using OSIsoft TrendMiner integrations, the first couple of items on this slide. But the two last ones, the ByVision integration, the OSIsoft cloud services integration, are probably new to most of you. And so I'd like to spend some time talking about those as well. So let's start with the archive and the asset framework. So when we originally started integrating with the PI system, lots of customers just had the PI archive. And what we did was we built a connector via OLEDB that would connect to the PI archive tags and make them available for analytics purposes in TrendHub. Right? That's the first thing we did. Now, obviously, that's not the full picture here anymore for many customers, many OSIsoft customers, since many of them started putting in place the AF server here, to also create more structure on top of the let's say the flat list of tags and time series in their archives. And the AF structure, basically, you can define asset structures in there. You can define attributes that then link back to the time series. And we started tapping into that asset framework as well, with basically with a connector on that side using the AF SDK. And that's been there for a while. Now, we are also shortly going to launch a new connector that is also for the more tag type of connectivity, is also going to use the AF SDK for that. So there's some advantages there in terms of performance, amongst other things. So that's kind of a schematic on where we are with respect to the PI archive and the asset framework integration. Now, what I want to do next is I want to show you a short video of how things map out from one universe to the other, and what you can expect if you start syncing or if you start linking to the asset framework on the OSIsoft side, how that will bubble up in TrendMiner in terms of an asset structure. I'm not going to show the PI archive connectivity. I think most of you are all set with that. But I'm going to show you how an asset structure looks like in the OSI tooling, and how it then maps out to TrendMiner. So what you see on the slide here is you basically see the tooling to configure an asset structure, and you see that we have an autoclave reactor defined as a template, going a bit too quick, with some attributes on it, temperatures and so on. And then we have a number of those reactors that are sitting in different locations. You have one in Houston, two in Hasselt. There's not too many autoclave reactors in Hasselt, I guess, in reality, so it's a toy example. And you see that you have a pressure measurement being linked here, so that's linking out to a pipe point. So that's a typical way you would set up an AF structure, and there's ways to do that at scale, so that's what OSIsoft has taken care to make that easy to do. So if you go to the settings screen in TrendMiner, you basically have some options to sync the asset framework and have it available also on the TrendMiner side. And then if you go to the asset browser on top, you would see that you have the different sites here that we had in the AF structure, and you have the different reactors that we were talking about. And you can start selecting attributes and use them in TrendMiner directly for your analytics work. So that's how that works and how easy that is to set up there. If your structure changes and you do a sync again, we will obviously respect the new structure and move things around accordingly based on the identifiers in the structure. We sometimes get the question, what do you do in terms of integration for authentication and authorization? Now, this is the way we typically would advise to set things up. If you are a bigger company, you probably have an Active Directory or well, an LDAP more generally, but typically Active Directory set up to define groups of users and also to do authentication there. So if you have two groups here, you can use those AD groups. I know there's other mechanisms that you can use on the OSI side, but you can use those AD groups to define PI identities on that side and then make sure your users have access to the right set of measurements, the right data, based on those PI identities on the OSIsoft side. Now, those groups can also be linked to, so we have a native connection to Active Directory that will actually create and keep those groups also living on the TrendMiner side, where you can then use ACLs to define access permissions, for instance, on connections. And those connections use or are set up with users that are basically users on the OSIsoft side. So that's one way to set this up typically. And so if you would delete a user from one of those AD groups, it would also automatically be removed here, and so the permissions would be taken away in terms of maybe not having access to one connection anymore. And if you would change the PI identity to change the permissions on that side, that would also affect which tags the connection has access to, and hence you would also automatically get the right user permissions on the TrendMiner side. So that's one way you can set up the integration there. Event frames. The next topic I wanted to address was event frames. You have the asset structure itself, but on the OSIsoft side, you also have a notion of event frames. Event frames are frames that are of interest because something happened. Maybe it could be a batch run, but it could also be an anomaly that you detect or an OEE event. Whatever matters to you, the structure is quite generic there. There is two aspects to this. There is each event frame will have a set of attributes potentially. So it has a start time, a stop time, but it might also have attributes such as an average temperature or the temperature at the start of the frame or other types of attributes. And so that's what you see depicted here. You see an event frame with its attributes in the middle. And to make it easy to set up, you can define also templates on the event frame side. So you can basically define maybe your templates according to ISA 88 if you're doing a batch process to set that up like that. Now what we do on the TrendMiner side with the event frames is basically two things. We have a possibility to also make that data available, and it's out of the box inside Context Hub. So what you would get is that whenever you set up event frames that implement certain templates, for each template definition, we would set up a new, or you would see basically a context item with that particular type, with the type being mapped to the event frame template, and all the properties of your event frame would become available in context items as properties on the context item. So that's how that side maps out. I know the example is not very consistent on the slide here, but you can picture how it would look in a more consistent case. So what can you do with that? You can start doing things. You can start offering all your users the possibility to search and filter through those event frames, to define views on them that they might think are of interest, filtered versions where maybe you only want your event frames where particular quality on your batch was lower than a certain threshold, and you want to create a view for that and save it and share it with other people. You can start collaborating, like I said this morning. You can do things like adding approvals on top. You can do attachments. So those are all, let's say, augmentations of the data infrastructure that's captured in the event frames there. The templates themselves, we also use the templates, and we started to build things like cross-asset search functionality, for instance, where maybe you don't want to do a search in one particular autoclave in this case, but you want to search in all three autoclaves at the same time. Now, the way we would know how those measurements map out is also because that's the way it's defined in the asset templates. Oh, yeah, this should be the AF templates. Sorry, not the asset templates, not the event frame templates. So let's look at an example of how those things look here. So if you have the elements here, so you will first go through the templates here. In this case, it's templates on phases of a particular batch process. This is the built-in example, I think, in the AF tooling. And so you have the same, you have some reactors again. And those reactors have event frames. You see the event frames representing the different phases here. So each event frame has a name, but it also has a template that it implements. So you can use those templates. You can visualize those event frames on the OSIsoft side directly. You can bring up a table with all the event frames depicted here with all their properties, and you would see when they've happened in time, which is the second column here. You would see where they are in time. And what we're going to show next is how you then bring those event frames into TrendMiner via the same screen as we were for the asset structure here. It's also using the same AF-SDK connection. So you have two options here. You have only syncing basically historical event frames, and you have a continuous update mechanism. Now, don't get fooled by the term syncing. It's not that we just copy and forget. We realize that master data and where it sits is important. In this case, the master data clearly sits in the OSIsoft side, on the event frames on the OSIsoft side. And we respect that in the sense that whenever updates come in, we respect the source and the identifiers of those items in the source. So we make sure that we update them accordingly, right? So what you see here is just a tabular view. It looks a little bit similar to the event frame view on the OSIsoft admin tooling there. And then you can start doing things like filtering. In this case, we filter on a component. We filter on a particular reactor here, so we see all the frames for this particular reactor. And then you can start doing interesting things. I don't know what's going to show here. I think we're going to switch to the Gantt chart view here, so you can actually bring up things like a sequence diagram where you visualize those event frames a little bit differently than what you would do in the admin tooling on the OSI side. And then you would see the properties here and the capabilities you can add on top. The approvals are not here because this was not a type of entry that needed approval. But you can see the common threads. You can see the possibility to attach things, which might be relevant for maybe failures and other things. Now, if you look at the sequence diagram, what you get there is basically a row per asset, a template, or context item type on the TrendMiner side combination. You get one row in this sheet, and we're adding options to be a bit more flexible in terms of layout. Now you can color all of those differently, and you get a bit of a more fancy image. This is an example that looks a bit more fanciful in terms of the color. So you can color things like hot phases red and cold phases blue, or whatever you think is appropriate. This is another example because it doesn't need to be batch runs. That's a typical example, but it can also be more health-related metrics. So you can basically build your health overview there if your event frames represent failures. So I wanted to show one more example of how things come together that we've discussed so far: the event frames, the asset framework, how that comes together in a TrendMiner scenario here.
What we're seeing here is a dashboard where I'm following up on the trends of 3 different autoclaves. So I'm looking at the last 8 hours for each of these autoclaves. And I'm looking at a monitor that's telling me if the autoclave is currently hot or if it's cold, if it's safe enough to handle. So just by looking at these trends, I can maybe get a good idea of how my process is doing, if we have had any upsets. But there's some information that I'm not yet harnessing in this dashboard, and that's the information on my quality of the product coming out of my autoclaves. Now this information is currently locked in my Pi event frames, but since TrendMiner imports these event frames from Pi, I actually have that information available to me in the context hub. So what I can do is jump to the TrendMiner context hub, create a new view, and I'm gonna say I want to select those autoclaves and get all the information that's on there that's coming from those Pi event frames. So the component in this case is going to be my 3 different autoclaves. Now this Pi asset framework, I'm also getting directly from Pi, so I can very easily just jump to my 3 autoclaves. I'm gonna select those, and I'm gonna include ancestors to get also the items that are on the entire autoclave area. So if I do that, I get all of my all of my context items or event frames of the last 8 hours. Maybe gonna expand that to the last day. I can get a nice Gantt chart overview of those as well. So immediately I can see by this warning symbol where we had bad quality. So if I click those, I can see that this one failed quality inspection, while the ones without a warning symbol, they passed that inspection. So what I can do maybe is to expand on the dashboard that we were using. I can create a filter here and say I only want to get the ones that failed quality inspection. So I'm gonna choose failed here. I'm gonna save this as failed cycles, why not? And what I can do then is in my dashboard add a new tile that's actually going to say failed cycles. So I'm just showing here the amount of cycles that failed in the last day. Now then whenever I see that we've had some failed cycles, I can click this one, right? I get an overview of all the cycles that failed in the last day. And I can use that as a starting point. Maybe I want to visualize this one. So TrendMiner is going to ask me which of the attributes do you want to add. So I'm going to select temperature, pressure, the phase here. Yeah, and maybe I can get an idea of why quality was bad in this case. And I definitely see something strange here, that pressure that should be going up and should be staying constant during my sterilization phase actually shows a sharp decrease and then still a slow buildup, but we're reaching nowhere near the pressure that it should be, which is around 1 bar. So the nice thing here of importing the asset framework is that if I want to search for this phenomenon, I can do so for all of my autoclaves at the same time. So the question I have here is, okay, how often does this happen on all of my autoclaves? So by using that asset framework, I can do a cross-asset value-based search. I'm gonna, of course, look for all of my autoclaves, right? And what defines this problem, it's going to be whenever the phase is sterilization and my pressure is a lot lower than, or just lower than that 1 bar. So I'm going to choose 0.95 here, and I'm going to search for that. And I get quite some results. So 3 on autoclave 1, 45. So that's quite a lot on autoclave 2. So there's probably something terribly wrong with autoclave 2, and just 1 result on autoclave 3. Now, this issue was on autoclave 2. I can now check maybe on autoclave 3 that we actually have the same issue there. So I'm just going to select one of those results. We need to visualize that pressure. Maybe we can also get that phase. And we can zoom out a bit. And I definitely see, yeah, I also have a similar pressure decrease here. So the same issue is actually happening on my other assets, my other autoclaves as well. So that's a nice way in which we're harnessing both those SPI event frames, or the information of those SPI event frames, and using that asset framework that we're getting from Pi to do some really fast and useful things.
There's 2 other integrations on the client side that I want to talk about. One is the process book integration, for those of you that are still heavily dependent on process book. The other one is the PyVision integration. Of course, if you're still using process book, there are ways to migrate from process book to PyVision. If you're in doubt how to do that or what the options and the possibilities are, you can talk to Richard after the talk, kind of, or he will refer you to the right people, would be the best way to put it. So the PyProcessBook integration is kind of a plugin in PyProcessBook, and I'm going to. Is the video on? So yeah, you're going to see it in the background here. So what is going to happen is that we will install a plugin in PyProcessBook, and then that plugin will help you to take any image that you're looking at in PyProcessBook, click a button, and it will take you to the same graphical image, the same tags, the same scales, the same colors in TrendMiner, so you can start building your or doing your next analytic steps on the TrendMiner side should you want to do that. We have taken care to make sure you can install this via MSZ installers and so on in corporate environments, so you don't have to install it one by one on the clients. So should you be interested to do that, you can do this. So you have this button open in TrendMiner, you saw it being configured, and then you get the same view in TrendMiner here for further analysis. So I think that's all there is to this. The PyVision one is similar in a sense, although of course PyVision is a completely different framework, completely different technology stack than ProcessBook. So we don't need to do Visual Basic and all of that. We can actually use the custom symbols option in PyVision to do this. There's multiple ways you can integrate with PyVision. We have now done this one as a first integration. If you have other ideas or other suggestions, this was based on feedback and well, explicit feedback from user interviews and so on, customer interviews. But if you have other ideas and you want to see other types of integrations and you think we should pursue them, definitely flag it to us. So what you're going to see here is something similar, namely putting up a view in PyVision. And then you already see, if you, in the library up there, you see a TrendMiner symbol, which is a TrendMiner custom widget for PyVision. And you can actually put that custom widget on a display, on a PyVision display, which allows you, if you have that widget on there, to navigate from one to the other. There's other integrations, again, that are possible in terms of embedding in the other direction, for instance. And we're definitely also interested to get your feedback on this kind of thing. So here you would have to point it to a TrendMiner instance, and then once you have your PyVision display, you can jump from one tool to the other. The same concept here, so you see the same view popping up on the TrendMiner side. So I think and I hope we still have enough time left to talk about this, because we're both quite excited about the OSIsoft cloud services and the path we're on there in terms of well, exploring integration with TrendMiner on OSIsoft cloud services. There's no better person to introduce OSIsoft cloud services than Richard, so I'll let him take the stage here, and then I'll just explain a little bit of one journey we were on with a particular case that we were looking at in terms of integration.
Okay, so you're probably not surprised, but I'm a chemical engineer by degree. And of course, you know, putting my life and my passion into building an information system of record. But I have to say, seeing all this information put into action is just, it just gets me really excited. Stirs up my chemical engineering roots. I'm like, oh, all the things we could do. So in this phase, I'm supposed to talk about OCS. We actually started OCS as a research project years ago, looking at the cloud and the cloud phenomenon, and asking ourselves and our customers, what does the cloud do for a system of record? What does a cloud do for our customers that we're not already doing or cannot otherwise already do? Why reinvent the wheel, so to speak? So we looked at the cloud, and we saw that the cloud introduced a couple of opportunities. But we focused those opportunities around a theme that we call community. And if you go back to what I was saying before about being able to bridge disparate systems or barriers to data, the notion of community is about not only connecting across literal communities, but even communities within an enterprise. And so we saw the cloud as representing a place that had the elasticity and the scale to accommodate the amount of data that we would expect in a community. And we saw it as a place where it was possible to share data outside of your boundaries. Share data or make data available to those that you trust without having to bring them into the enterprise or without having to bring them close to the control network. So that was really our motivation that drove our work and the cloud. So what are we doing with OCS and what is driving our initial work? So one, we talked about connected community, really bringing people together of like minds. Second is around remote operations monitoring, and which I'm sure is probably self-explanatory to you. But one of the things we've seen as more and more data sources, especially driven by IoT and by mobility, become available. You're not necessarily going to hook those into your control network or even into your enterprise data system directly. So this gave a neutral brokered place for this diverse landscape of IoT and mobile assets and this whole emerging space to find a home within the overall system of record. And then we have data science enablement. And for us, I mean, we go back to our theme of we're trying to manage the data and make the data available. We're not building the applications. So in Archer's talk, he differentiated nicely between the self-service analytics represented by TrendMiner and what did he call it? I wrote this down. The self-service and the data science. So to serve the data scientists who are really looking to bring their latest gadgets and tools and R and Python, and they're bringing their game to the table. That's what we're doing with data science enablement. We're trying to make the data consumable, available to that scenario. And then that brings us to the platform as a service and partner applications. And this is where we're really excited that we can bring that reach of the data to partner applications that are cloud first or cloud oriented. So the way we imagine this is really it's part of a continuum. You have your enterprise PI systems, and those through integration will synchronize some or all of the data into the cloud, making it available to partner applications. So that, at least in this case, if you have somebody that's really focusing on a domain-specific batch application, they can work with the same data set. All you have to do is authorize them. You don't have to set up different things to make it available to TrendMiner. So we believe that that's going to really drive a richer ecosystem around domain-specific applications. We would love to see TrendMiner be able to serve all of our customers through this vehicle across the different regions and worldwide. So that is, in a nutshell, what we're doing with data science. So I think I just jumped into your slide, but I'll turn this back over to Thomas to talk about what they've done in this space.
All right. So our journey with OSIsoft Cloud Services started quite some time ago, and the project was still in a quite early stage. Well, or at least it wasn't generally available yet. And the first project we did with it was inspired by one of TrendMiner's barbecue fanatics back then, where we basically hooked up temperature sensors in the barbecue, in the smokers, where we hooked them up to OSIsoft cloud services that required some Raspberry Pi hacking, I believe. But anyway, it worked, and where we started analyzing and optimizing the pulled pork production. Right, so where we managed to reduce, or Hans managed to reduce cycle times on his pulled pork production. And as you can see on the next slide, the quality still seems acceptable. People still like what they get on their plate. This is obviously a toy example, right? I want to walk you through a more real use case of OCS and where it really shines and fits in. And one of those use cases that we've been looking at is a use case where a service company is managing blowout preventer tests for drilling wells. And so the service company is doing those tests and need to basically be able to share the data, share the output, share the reports with the responsible oil and gas companies. And also wants to do more analytics on it. They want to automate some of the analytics on the test results here. So that's a use case that does relate to remote operations data. It relates to the community aspect that Richard was referring to. And it also relates to analytics, which obviously is nice if we want to throw TrendMiner in the mix. So to make that really clear, so there is one oil rig here, and the data of that oil rig ends up in one PI system. And the idea is that that data and the analytics on that data primarily needs to go to an oil and gas company A, whereas a second oil rig needs to, or has its data ending up in different PI systems, and the data needs to be shared with oil and gas company B. But it's not just the data sharing. It's doing the analytics on the data, it's sharing the insights, and not just the data itself. And that's where the combination of OSIsoft cloud services together with TrendMiner, but also with the integration capabilities of WebMethods IO from the Software AG portfolio, are a really interesting combination here, right? So the first thing I want to zoom into is bringing the data from the on-premises systems into the OSIsoft Cloud Services platform, and then how you can connect TrendMiner to that, how easy it is to set that up, basically. What you're going to see here is this is the OSIsoft Cloud Services interface, and what we're going to show is basically how the connections are set up to the OCS platform. So basically what you need to do is you need to, and correct me if I'm wrong, Richard, but you need to install agents on the PI systems, and from that point onwards, it's really all manageable from OCS. So you can select which data bubbles up to the OCS platform from there. So what you see here is that there's two namespaces defined here on the OCS side. And namespaces are a way to structure your data here. And so what we've done is we've basically created different roles here, one for each end customer, and each of those customers has access to data that ends up in a particular namespace. So read and write access in this case. And then if you look at the connections, that's where the connectivity to the PI systems is configured here. And you see that we have a historical transfer as well as a live transfer. And you can actually add point source masks to determine or decide which data needs to move up to the OCS platform. So what we did next is we basically took the client IDs and secrets, and we used them to set up connections on the TrendMiner side to OCS. So we have a connector defined here, which is an OCS connector, which connects to one of those namespaces with a client ID and secret. Oh, so based on one of the permissions of one of the roles to the OCS platform. And you have another one for the second connection. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take the test data from the blowout preventer test. And what you see is that there's all these tests that have been done historically. This happens to be a good one, so we're going to start from here. So we take this good test, and we're going to show this test here in more detail. And then we're going to create a fingerprint of what the good test typically looks like. So we're going to find more tests that are, let's say, equally good or at least good enough. And the way we are going to do this in this case is by doing similarity search to find more similar tests, because if this one is a good one, we probably want the others also, or we want them to look like this. So we're going to pick the ones that are most similar here. We're going to overlay them on the screen, and then we're going to create a fingerprint in TrendMiner out of that. And for those of you that are familiar with TrendMiner, this should look like a familiar workflow. Now, once we have this set up, what we can do is we can, so once we have a fingerprint set up, and we can set up a monitor alert that detects deviations from this particular golden test, if you want to call it that way, and we can put those on a dashboard. And that's the next thing you're going to see is we're going to create a dashboard where we have some statistics on the number of tests that failed, the number of tests that succeeded, and some graphical elements on the display. So we can start sharing that with the different oil and gas companies. So in this case, one oil and gas company would have access to one connection, so we're sure they can only see that data, and the other one to the other connection, and they map to the namespaces on the permissions on the OCS side. Also notice that, so here we're still setting up the alert and the actions associated with the alert. Notice the webhook here in the bottom, that's a new feature. It's basically allowing you to hook up other systems, so you can actually start integrating your way out from TrendMiner. And we're going to pick this up in the next part of the demo, where we're going to start including the WebMethods tooling here. So here we're creating the dashboard. So we basically put our last test on the dashboard, and we're also going to put a count on the dashboard. First, the alert itself to see if that one was good or not, or if there's a deviation detected here. And then we're also going to include a count, so which is a context view here. Fast forward to that. A context view that basically contains the records of the different tests and whether they were successful or not. So we're going to add two of those, one for the bad tests and one for the good tests here. It's as simple as selecting the view once you've set that up, where your tests are. So you have the bad ones, and then we can add one for the good ones as well. So you can picture the end result being a dashboard like that you can then share with the different oil and gas companies. So we've done this part, and we've discussed how you bring data into OCS and how you can analyze it with TrendMiner, taking into account permissions and things like that, and how you can then start sharing your work. So we didn't look at that step, but you can share the dashboard with the different users in TrendMiner here. I want to bring in WebMethods.io in the mix. WebMethods is an integration product, and so if you look again at this webhook, we're going to use this as a way to integrate to a flow here, and this flow is also, this is a cloud-based product from Software AG, where you can basically compile what you want to happen when a certain, when in this case a webhook is triggered. Interestingly, we have developed connectors to OCS also for this platform, so you can quite easily do things. We're still setting up the webhook here. But you can quite easily hook it up with this webhook, and also quite easily read data and write data from OCS streams there, because we have made a connector that, a block in WebMethods.io that makes that really easy, and that has some pre-built functions like reading the last value out of a stream, or writing something back there. And you will see that being demonstrated. So the flow we are going to do is basically whenever we have a good test, we're going to write to a particular OCS stream, we're going to write that it's okay. Whenever we have a bad test, we're going to write that it was not okay. So we're basically writing back to OCS. There's also a path on the bottom here, just more for illustration purposes, where we are reading data from a stream whenever the alert fires, and then we can do other things, like we can upload a file, or we can do whatever it takes. And you can see how easy this is to map out graphically. So again, it's self-service integration here. And in the talk that Rob is going to give later, he's going to demonstrate how easy it is also to build connectors in case you don't have a supported connector out of the box for the system you want to connect to. So you see the different pre-built functions that we've added to this beta version of our OCS block in WebMethods. All right. Now, the power of this is not just that you can connect to OCS, but the power of it is also that you have a whole library of hundreds of connectors available to other applications. So you can start integrating out to wherever you want, basically. We're going to add one example, which is the ServiceNow example, I think, where we drag a block on the canvas to basically create a request in ServiceNow also when this webhook is being triggered. So you see the list here. It's a list. It's a long list. So we're going to pull a ServiceNow block, and then you can also create those output in ServiceNow here. So what we basically touched is a number of different integrations around OCS. We've obviously discussed the TrendMiner integration with OCS and how you can add analytics on top of your OSIsoft Cloud Services data. We have also discussed how you can hook up WebMethods from TrendMiner when a webhook is triggered, but you can also hook up WebMethods directly with the read stream reading directly to OSIsoft Cloud Services should you want to do so. So you can basically combine these things in many different ways to implement various use cases. So going back to the slide of what we set out to do, we set out to do things like giving access to remote access to operations data. We set out to share insights, to share data also, and we did that in two ways. We actually put up a dashboard that we could share with one oil and gas company, but we also wrote back data to OCS, and you could actually have OCS be the sharing platform for the data side of things. Obviously, that's what it's meant to do. We also did a TrendMiner fingerprint, so we also kind of touched on the topic of adding analytics on OCS, one of those things that Richard was pointing out as a goal as well. This is another way to look at it if you have different business units. There's various use cases in which you could consider using this platform. And I think it's particularly powerful if you have some data already in PI systems and you want to find a way to share that and to implement that community aspect that Richard was talking about. But even within a single company, you can obviously also use it in central group settings or when your assets are remotely spread out and you want to create and share insights there. So, with that, I would like to conclude and look a bit towards the future because we have quite some integration points with OSIsoft tooling today. I hope that's clear. But it's not the end point, and I wanted to talk a bit about what's coming next also. So this is a summary of what we've discussed. So we've discussed attributes and tags and how you can use those, how you can use the assets, the AF templates for things like the cross-asset search, how the asset structure also is reflected in the browser, in the asset browser inside TrendMiner. We've discussed the event frames and how you can integrate them and also, create communication collaboration around them, enrich them further, and so on. And we've discussed the client tooling integration and the OSIsoft Cloud Services integration. So we're working on productizing further or making some of those things generally available further, as you see in the first column. One of the things we're also looking at is implementing or working on is implementing multiple AF support to simultaneously connect to multiple AF databases and potentially in combination with a part with a CSV-defined asset structure should you not have it set up fully. But we're also planning other improvements like support for child attributes in the asset structure, which we currently don't support yet, and improved support for attributes and assets in the PyVision integration that we touched upon. And then some of the things we definitely also are going to move into is things like writing back to the event frame infrastructure for context items that maybe you're defining directly in TrendMiner or that come in via TrendMiner alerts. And there's multiple options to look at that. Obviously, we can already ad hoc, you could already consider ad hoc integrating that with the integration flows that I was discussing during the OCS example, but we want it to be out of the box as much as we can. And then there is other things that we're considering next. That's a good way to put it when there's no timing known yet. So you've seen this picture during my keynote earlier this morning. I still like it because it kind of brings together those two worlds of democratizing analytics and democratizing data. And obviously, you need the data to be able to do the analytics. We discussed during the talk now, especially on the OCS side, how OSIsoft infrastructure and WebMethods integration capabilities can really help you to democratize data, both on the ingestion side and also to spread the analytics insights back in your organization.